welcome to Books and Things with Tom. Probably looks a little different here because we got some displays and we got a special program going on. Tonight we're going to graphically demonstrate the reality of the heroin epidemic from addiction to recovery and all stops in between. Shocking and chats and data proven. It's going to be presented by Dr. Frank Maletz, Chief Kenneth Richards Jr., and James Spellman Jr., and this is a 1-hour presentation. Set your DVRs. You may want to watch it twice. I am going to introduce Dr. Frank Maletz, and he is going to be our first presenter.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to get you started here on a presentation that, as Tom said, takes us on an overview of the entire epidemic that is going on in the country right now. In 2016, we had 62,000 deaths from overdoses of opioids. That translates into 170 people dying every single day, or 7 people every hour. So during the time that we're taping tonight, we're going to have 7 deaths across the United States from this epidemic. The other thing I'd like to highlight is we have focused predominantly on opioids and narcotics and the prescription over treatment, which has occurred, and a lot of press has been given to that. That's a little bit of a misnomer, and I'd like to translate that into what we prefer to call this, which is a syndrome of addictive brain disease. And what do we mean by that? Any agent which is psychoactive, that is, affects the brain, is basically part of the conversation, and should be. Let's talk about chemical psychoactive agents. They include caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, marijuana, and all of the cannabinoids, stimulants, the topic that we were introducing, the opioids, heroin, cocaine, and stronger drugs, the semisynthetics like carfentanil. But also, not to be too constrained by just the chemistry, we're also talking about addictive behaviors. These include food addictions, eating disorders, work and passions, sex and porn, gambling, and the newest one on the list is screening, addiction to media, electronics, and games. So let's go back 30 years, 1987, the Partnership for a Drug-Free America convinced us that this was your brain. I'm certain that most folks know that this is not a brain, but if it were a brain, then they convinced us that this was your brain on drugs. And since we don't have a stove here, I can't put the sizzle to the frying egg. But again, in 1987, the knowledge base was this was your brain, and this was your brain on drugs. I would submit that in 2017, the picture is quite a bit different. Most of my professional life has been dealing with these structures called the bones. And I made a career out of taking care of bones. What I can tell you is that inside the brain case, or the case of bones, is the most miraculous structure that I have ever encountered now that I've been studying it for the last 6 months in preparation for conversations like this about a brain disease. This 3 pounds of structure called the human brain is one of the most amazing structures that God and Darwin have evolved. Let me split the hemispheres into right and left hemispheres and show you the inside of this marvelous structure. First and foremost, this is made up of approximately 100 billion, let me say that carefully again, 100 billion neurons or nerve cells. Connecting those nerve cells is the potential for 100 trillion, let me say that again carefully, 100 trillion connections. In this structure in the center, joining the right and left hemispheres, is a structure called the corpus callosum. That joins the two hemispheres, and that, in this small area of the brain, connects 300,000 fiber tracts. So quite an amazing structure that we're dealing with. When folks take psychoactive agents or expose themselves to behaviors that are psychoactive, this complex structure reduces to a very simple equation. In the area here in the middle brain is an area called the reward system. And that reward system secretes a chemical called dopamine. When exogenous, that is coming from the outside of the body, when exogenous stimulants occur, dopamine is secreted and affects that reward system. That creates the high. The problem with that high is very simply this: never again does the brain experience the same degree of high without either increasing the psychoactive agent input or actually becoming more frequent takers of those agents. And that is what leads to addictive brain disease. Here's the biggest problem. Once that occurs, once addiction occurs from any of the list of psychoactive agents or behaviors that we spoke about, this area in the front, so again, this would be the front of the brain up toward the forehead, right behind the eyes, is the prefrontal cortex. This area of the brain is what separates us from the animals. This is where executive functions occur. And in those executive functions are cognitive behaviors, the ability to discern and distinguish, executive functions, self-control behaviors. When that area gets hijacked or sabotaged by substances of abuse or behaviors of addiction, the patient is now under the control of the medication, the substance, or the behavior. And that begins the process of binging, craving, and the associated behaviors that relate to doing anything possible to get that drug or to continue that behavior. And then we have an addiction. And the addiction is a long-term recovery problem in the brain, which is the final common pathway for all of the trajectory we're going to discuss this evening. So the brain, the individual human brain, is a complex structure, but the reward system is extremely simple to deal with, and we understand it much better than we did in 1987. Having said that, I want to focus on an area of social policy that brings our next speaker to the fore, and that is Ken Richard.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for having us here tonight. We got involved in this in the emergency services a couple years ago. We started realizing that we had a problem out on the street. And in areas like my own in the Old Mystic Fire District, we started having heroin overdoses where we've never seen them in the past. So we felt it was a problem that we needed to address. In being the past president of the Connecticut Fire Chiefs Association in 2011, I brought it to that group, and we all agreed that it was a problem and we needed to get involved. we've always been in the forefront. We've always done what's right. And in the August meeting that we had of the organization, we had the same presentation you're seeing tonight. And after that presentation, it was very apparent that we had two people within our organization that were directly affected by people in their family that had a heroin addiction. So we had a vote that night to come out with a position statement, a strong position statement on overdoses, opioid overdoses and heroin, and it was voted on by 75 members that night unanimously. And what we're looking for is we're looking for action. The time is gone for committees. The time is gone for getting in front of cameras and talking about it. Things need to be done. And just today they had a meeting in Hartford on this subject. And what we're asking for now is we want to be part of it, but we want a seat at the table. We want to actually be there, be part of this, and see it through to the end. And we want to see the dealers off the street. We want to see the people that are affected by this get the care they needed all the way from the beginning to the end, and the families taken care of. So that's my part of it. I'm seeing it out there on the street in the organization that I'm with, the Connecticut Fire Chiefs. We just want to see it stopped. We want to see it taken seriously, and we want to see people get the care they need all the way from the person that has the addiction to the first responders that have to deal with it out on the street and the families of these people. So with that said, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Coach Jim Spellman, and I'll be back later on to explain other parts of it.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Tom, for having us on today. Let me speak first to my odyssey into being involved into combating the heroin epidemic. I spent an idyllic career in public education as a teacher of English literature, a teacher of American history, and as a coach of football, basketball, and track. Could not have been happier in my interactions with students, citizens, parents, fellow teachers. It was a tremendous experience. I'll carry it through to my dying day. When I exited the profession, there was a loss, a miss of the kids, but thankfully I had remained in contact with hundreds of my former players and students and got that joy, if not every hour, at least every day, being in contact with one of them. In spring and summer of 2014, either by newspaper or by a telephone call, I was contacted that 4 of my former football players and/or former students had passed away. Strangely enough, there was no automobile accident. There was no indicator of a serious disease that lasted for months, led to a deterioration, led to death. It was simply that they had died. They had passed away. I attended the wakes, I attended the funerals with no explanation of what had caused their deaths. Thankfully, after the 4th funeral, I asked 2 of my former football players, this is what happened. This is the 4th funeral I've been to in 5 months. They said, Coach, your head has been in the sand. Aren't you aware that this particular age group that we belong to, that you taught for decades, is being impacted by either pills or heroin? It took me a while to digest and focus on the reality of that, because it was completely shocking. Here in southeastern Connecticut, southern Rhode Island, the wonderful New England of my youth was being invaded by that I had always associated with the great metropolitan areas of the United States. I began to discuss it with some aged peers over coffee on a Friday. And in autumn of 2014, discussing it with a group of 5 individuals, 3 of them broke down in tears, stating that they had members of their family, some children, some nieces, some nephews, that were opioid or heroin addicts. With that, The individuals sitting around that coffee table were very, very quickly joined by others and formed an organization whose banner you see in front of you tonight, Shine a Light on Heroin. We were committed to the use of opioids and heroin no longer being a secret, no longer being something that people did not talk about, rather being something that people were made aware of and ideally becoming educated on. Very, very quickly, a number of very, very qualified people joined the group. People who were experts on what Dr. Maletz focused on earlier, the treatment of addiction. People who were expert on getting individuals into recovery. Not only was Shine a Light on Heroin formed, but another wondrous community organization in the area, Community Speaks Out, was formed to assist individuals into recovery. With that, my role in the organization became that of setting up chairs and making things comfortable for the people who were doing presentations. But I began to ponder, where was the heroin coming from? Media at that time would have us believe that the totality of the heroin coming into the United States was originating in Mexico. United Nations hard and fast figures on drug use showed that Mexico alone is not capable of providing the heroin that is being used in the United States. Further research, once again using United Nations data, the country of Afghanistan, a country that we have occupied militarily since 2001, is the provider of 90% of the heroin that is used in the world. It is the primary source of the heroin coming into the United States that addicts and kills our citizens, most especially our youth, on a daily basis. With that, I had a suggestion made by a parent of a deceased addict. Said, Coach, if we were to be able to assist you with funds, would you go to Afghanistan in order to give yourself the validity of being able to speak to the source? In January of this year, 2017, I journeyed to Afghanistan. One can go to Wikipedia on the internet and find out some very basic information about Afghanistan. It's a territory the size of the state of Texas, intersected by huge mountain ranges, dividing it up into valleys. One can also find out on the internet that it is an area that is occupied by 14 different ethnic groups. With that as a background, I arrived in the area referred to as Afghanistan. And to me, it remains an area known as Afghanistan. It is not a nation. They do not think of themselves as a nation. Asking an individual who lives in that locale to identify themselves, they will first of all identify themselves by ethnic group, one of the 14 tribes, racial groups that occupy the area. Secondly, they will identify themselves as either being Shiite or Sunni, the two primary sects of the Muslim religion. Thirdly, they will identify themselves by either their clan or their tribe. Fourthly, they will identify themselves by the particular province that they live in. There are 32 in Afghanistan. Finally, as an afterthought, they will identify themselves as being Afghan, and that primarily as being a courtesy to an outsider. What does Afghanistan join under? What is common? What binds them together? Fact, 1 out of every 10 Afghans work in producing the poppy field produce, the opium gum, the base that is refined into heroin. 1 in every 10. 33% of the GNP, the gross national product of Afghanistan, is based upon the production of heroin. As Thomas Sweitz, a U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, stated in 2008, Afghanistan is not a nation. It is a narco state. It is an entity that exists in order to produce heroin, that lives off of heroin, that lives by heroin. We have occupied it since 2001. The shame of the occupation of Afghanistan by the United States is that yearly the production of heroin has done nothing but increase. 3 years ago in Afghanistan, the production took a quantum leap because of the miracles of modern science. All of us know of GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Some scientists got together, probably were paid by the Afghan drug lords or the Mexican cartels, and came up with a better poppy plant. A poppy plant that produced more abundant poppy blossoms and therefore produced a plenitude of the secretion that is gathered from the poppy field blossom that is used to eventually produce heroin. Not only did it increase the yield, it increased the potency. For the first time this summer, that GMO modified heroin is finding its way into the United States. Dr. Maletz mentioned earlier, 63,000 people dead in 2016 from heroin. With the more potent product, with the more abundant supply of heroin coming into the United States, that will do nothing but increase. Have measures been taken to cut down on the opioid epidemic? Certainly. There's been some great laws passed, great regulatory processes cutting down on the prescription of opioid medications. There's been a social awareness made that you do not store opioid pills, that they're subject to being stolen and go out on the black market feeding addicts. Has accomplished wonderful things. But, as Dr. Frank Maletz already stated, once an individual is addicted, that addiction has to be fed. If pills are not available, heroin is. Heroin will always be available as long as Afghanistan is allowed to continue to produce it. Now, whether the cessation of that production be done by diplomatic means, whether it be done by international agreements, or if it has to be done by force, it is a necessary precursor to ending the heroin epidemic in the United States. Now, what is the epidemic in the United States? What Dr. Frank, the chief, and I have assembled is a pictorial, a tabletop presentation that's in front of you. You have at one end addiction. Individuals represented by cups. Just like a cup, a person is as good as what is put into it. You put heroin, as Dr. Frank is demonstrating, into an individual, he or she becomes addicted. 25 cups, each representing 4% of the addicted population in the United States, or in a particular town or region. When do you hear about an individual that is addicted? Either you hear about it through family contact, or more likely, you hear about it in the media when an individual suffers an overdose, goes down, and the first responders, such as Chief Richards, the police department, the ambulance crews, have to arrive to deal with them. Tragic. Not only tragic, costly. We have to devote our first responders time, efforts, materials, expenditures to dealing with overdoses. It costs you money out of your tax dollars. Now, when an individual is found by the first responders, what occurs? Who more graphically, by firsthand experience, to explain that than once again Chief Richards?
Thank you, Jim. Well, when we get called to the scene of a heroin overdose, first and foremost, we have to make sure that it's safe for us, for the first responders, to be there. So once we get there, we make sure that it's a safe scene for us to go in, and then we go to the patient, and we have to check for vital signs. We have to make sure that their airway's open, they're breathing, and their heart's beating at the time. Sometimes that's the case with us, sometimes it isn't. There's times we get there, it's too late. The person's been down for too long, there's nothing we can do for them, and they're pronounced. But when we do get there in time, for instance, 3 weeks ago, we had a call in Old Mystic where we were very fortunate. We had a 23-year-old female have a heroin overdose in one of the local hotels, and one of our staff was coming back from a fire marshal's inspection, and they were in the hotel room next to her, on her side, within a minute and a half after the call. She was not breathing adequately. She was only breathing 4 to 5 times a minute. So they started breathing for her with an ambu bag. And we administered 8 milligrams of Narcan. That's double the dose we normally use. And with the 8 milligrams of Narcan, we just barely got her back to consciousness. The paramedics got there, the ambulance got there, and she was transported. And to this day, she's alive to tell about the tale. So that was a success story for us. It's not always a success story for us. There's times when we do our best, we use Narcan, and we don't succeed. But it's not a pretty scene. Sometimes we have to defibrillate the heroin overdoses with a defibrillator. Sometimes we have to do what they call intubation, where we actually put a tube down their windpipe to breathe for them. And a lot of times, all of this is happening in front of their family, in front of children, in front of wives, husbands, etc. And sometimes they don't even know that there's a problem. The first time they realize that something is wrong is when we show up to the house. We had an instance once where we got to the house. The husband was in the bathroom, still had a needle in his arm when we got there. He was totally in cardiac arrest. We defibrillated him, got him back. And when we were taking him out of the house on the litter, the stretcher for the ambulance, we didn't even know there was a young boy in the house. And the young boy had just opened up the curtains in his bedroom and was looking out, watching his father being loaded into an ambulance with us working on him when he was virtually, for all intents purposes, he was dead 2 minutes beforehand, 5 minutes beforehand. Those are images that will stick with the first responder for the rest of their lives, and it will stick with that young child for the rest of their life, too. So it's a major problem for us out on the street. It's a safety issue for us. Sometimes when we use Narcan on a heroin overdose, when they come around, they get violent on us. So that's a danger to us also. Now with all of the additives to the heroin, the fentanyl and the carfentanil, if we get it on us, as much as we try, we wear gloves, we wear masks, we wear eye protection if we have to. There was a police officer in Maryland. His partner just had a little bit of it on his uniform. His partner just brushed it off with the back of his hand. Within 2 to 3 minutes, that police officer was down in the police station. They had to use Narcan on one of their own to bring him around because that heroin was laced with carfentanil, which is an extremely, extremely higher danger to you as an individual than straight heroin. So at the end of the day, we're putting ourselves at risk. There's families out there that have to deal with that for the rest of their lives, the images they see. And a good day for us is a save. A bad day for us is when we get there and it's just too late and we can't do anything.
No one can put a prioritization on one life over another. But the reality of the first responder situation is that it's a limited resource. There are only so many individuals who are trained as EMTs. There are only so many ambulances. There are only so many fire trucks. There are only so many police cars within a community that can respond to a crisis. Every heroin overdose occupies those first responders. If another citizen should find him or herself in a scenario of having cardiac arrest, of having taken a fall while working around the house, when those first responders are out working on a heroin overdose, they get put on a waiting list. That's intolerable. Because while some health conditions, such as cardiac arrest, cannot be avoided, accidents will always happen. What we can cut down on is the supply of heroin that causes overdoses. Now, let's say that this overdose victim is resuscitated through Narcan and is taken to the hospital emergency room. Dr. Frank, could you describe what takes place there and what the cost of doing so is?
Absolutely. So the emergency department is very commonly the point of entry into the medical system of the rest of the presentation as you see it depicted. Emergency department professionals, whether advanced practice nurses, PAs, or doctors, deal with the actual overdose victim doing what Fire Chief Richards described, or actually taking the patient and evaluating them for a lot of the concomitant problems, not only the addiction itself, but mental health problems that may be comorbid with their drug use or behaviors of abuse. At that point, a decision is made to fully evaluate the patient, go through a standard review of their systems, complete physical examination, and at that point, a determination is made as to whether the patient can move through the system into recovery or whether they need additional medical assistance. And all of that, again, utilizing our monetary descriptors, costs money. Not atypically, chronic addiction results in joblessness, homelessness, a lack of insurability, and that also is a cost to the entire system that is deflected. And depending on what those costs are, the patient requires our assistance because an addict is a patient. They require all of our services, all of our best expertise, all of our investigative tools, and that requires, again, as was said by Coach Spellman, a preoccupation with that patient in the emergency department, which diffuses services away from other patients that require additional assistance. So again, whatever the cost per patient is, that is distributed across the entire healthcare environment and requires dollars, expertise, and resources to be utilized to care for those patients.
I want to add a little bit of emphasis to what Dr. Maletz has just stated. Let's put some more money down for the emergency room response. Addicts, by and large, in fact, I would say in my experience with dealing with literally hundreds of active addicts, do not have full-time jobs. Their occupation is being an addict. From the time they wake up in the morning to the time they fall into a drug slumber at night, their sole source of intent is to get that, as Dr. Frank began with, the next high. Addiction is a full-time occupation. If you don't work, you are not contributing to the system. You are not paying taxes. If taxes are not coming in from a significant portion of the population, what does that incur the rest of the population to pay more in taxes? Addiction costs lives, it costs health. It also is rippling out across our economy, having a direful impact on our standard of living. Not only on our standard of living, but on our quality of life. Individuals who are addicts, incapable of holding a job, nonetheless having as much as a $200, $250 a day habit. Do the simple math on that. At the low end, it ends up being $1,400 per week for an addict to feed his or her habit. How does one do so? By vile means. Either prostitution of self, selling one sexually in order to raise funds to pay for the heroin, or I'm sure the audience that is viewing this presentation can reflect that over the past 5 years, they have seen a huge increase in the number of breaking and entering, car thefts, stealing of items from cars throughout the southeastern Connecticut, southern Rhode Island region. That is not a result of a poor economy. It is a result of addicts needing to raise money to feed their addiction. All that breaking and entering requires more police work, requires higher insurance premiums, it costs more money. Anyone who is so ill-advised as to make the statement that the heroin epidemic is having no impact on me is fooling only themselves. It is hitting everyone in their billfold, in their pocketbook, in their paycheck, in tax dollars and incidental expenses such as insurance that are being risen in cost by the heroin addiction that occurs. Now, Dr. Frank, you want to give the addicts another dose that came in from Afghanistan? Okay, and all those addicts are getting their dose. Hey, guess what? This one just got apprehended using on the street by a police officer, caught with the substance. They go into the judicial system. What happens to an addict within the judicial system? Most of the time, they are referred to counseling. They are offered an advisor. They are told of means in order to get help. One of the horrors of addiction is that most addicts don't choose to get help. They will give lip service to whoever is talking to them, be it in the ER room or in judicial referral, and they will go right back to being an addict. We've been pretty pessimistic up to this point. Let's, however, look. There are some former addicts who have made it through addiction and made it to recovery. We'll get to them again in a moment. Let's take another couple more addicts who may be at the behest of their family, their friends, or something that was said within the judicial system to them took, and they seek help. They go into detox. Dr. Maletz, could you talk to what detox is like for an addict?
Absolutely. So we started with the neuroscience, but these drugs are painkillers. They have very strong psychoactive effects on the brain. They also are very commonly associated with the GI system. They cause GI upset, gastrointestinal diarrhea, constipation, and they have a number of physiologic effects other than those that I described in the brain. When an addict is detoxified from that particular set of medications and the accommodations that the body makes to those medications, they go through a process which is horrendous. That process is called withdrawal. And so all of the effects of those drugs now are reversed. And so what happens is they go through severe pain because the pain-killing effect is gone. They go through severe nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Their muscles, which were previously sedated, go through writhing episodes of severe muscle contractions. And in addition to all of that, they are not getting their psychoactive high. So they feel horrible, miserable, unhappy, and incredibly cued to not go through that any longer and to go back to substances of abuse.
And indeed, that is exactly what does occur. Conservatively speaking, 50% of those who make it to detox drop out. That's right, drop out. There is no holding system in all but prison systems for detox. They can't function holding people prisoners who are going through this incredible, difficult withdrawal. So the option is you can walk out the door. Well, you don't walk out the door to rehab and recovery. You go back to where you started, back into the addictive pool. And that heroin from Afghanistan is waiting for you. It is welcoming you. All the physical duress, all the pain of detox is relieved with addiction, with the paramount cost to everyone else. Let's move some who have made it through detox into recovery. Recovery is not an instantaneous process. Findings are being made daily that the old 30-day detox and counseling is not going to work. It's not going to take place. Doctor, could you speak to what the latest findings are as far as recovery is concerned, how an individual should be granted greater access?
So again, as Coach Spellman said, we have presented a fairly bleak picture and one that most of the audience is going to sit there and go, we can't do anything about this. And in fact, that is not true. There is a remarkable ability in the brain, and data now shows that that is not just the early brain of childhood or adolescence. This goes on throughout the lifetime of healing, of a thing called neuroplasticity. So if we get the addict through the detoxification process, if we get the addict through the health crisis, if we can bridge them to the ability for the prefrontal cortex we talked about earlier to begin to execute self-control, execute proper decision-making, what happens is a miracle. And it has happened in many of the stories we've heard. These folks are our heroes and our heroines. That is, our celebrated recoverers, because their brains actually heal. And when the neurons of the reward system and the neurons that have been addicted shed that, they prune and become normal again, normalize, there is absolutely proof that that occurs. However, the short-term detoxification, the short-term stays of 30 days, that is absolutely proven to be inadequate for that process to occur. And it has a lot to do with how long one has been an addict, how long one has been taking these substances, and also the dosing. The more chronic this has become, the longer it takes. To give you some framing, cancer, when it is treated and successfully eliminated, We have a 5-year survival celebration because we call that, in many cases, a cure. I think we're looking at something similar with the brain healing process. This is a long-term recovery, more in the order of years, not months. Coach?
Again, I would refer back to the fact that most addicts do not have a job. Therefore, they do not have insurance. They are unable to pay for their detoxification. They are unable to pay for their rehab. They're unable to pay for their recovery mechanisms. Where does it come from? It comes from family. It comes from friends. It should be coming from government entities who must realize that unless you're content to be at this end, you had best put some money at this end to assist addicts. Community Speaks Out, Groton, Connecticut, does a wondrous job of finding detox rehab recovery facilities for individuals. They do a outstanding job of promoting that society, government, has to take on the onus of responsibility to save our citizens. If you read the blogs in the London Day on any article on the heroin, the opioid epidemic, there are a few nameless individuals, they use a pseudonym, a pen name, who speak of the heroin epidemic as culling the herd. Let them die. Don't Narcan them. We are losing the youth of America, potentially some of our best and brightest. As we are giving this presentation, approximately an hour, 10 individuals in the United States began using heroin. Over 100 per day use heroin for the first time. In other words, that pool down at the end is always increasing because of the fact that the heroin from Afghanistan being bought by the Mexican cartels because they can buy it in Afghanistan cheaper than they can raise it in Juarez or the other counties of Mexico is coming into the United States, flooding us. Individuals, as Dr. Maletz referred to them, true heroes who have endured addiction, who have endured detox, who have gutted their way through recovery, are now at a blessed stage. How do they do it? Some are supplanted by medications that assist them in recovery. Others move to a 12-step program. This is a Bible that's in front of you. 12-step programs are greater power based individuals who, just as when they were an addict, had to spend every day figuring out where to get their next fix, now will spend the rest of their life focusing on how not to slide back into that chain of addiction. We have presented to you the reality of the heroin opioid epidemic. It's laid out in front of you. A never-ending supply, addiction, first responders, costs, utilization of hospitals, a scarcity of proper detox, rehab, recovery efforts, with a paucity of individuals who have been able to reach recovery. Question, rhetorical question. Is America willing to endure this forever? Because if we make that decision, that the heroin epidemic is now a fact of life, new addicts will be added every day. Costs will do nothing but increase. Crime will do nothing but incrementally be added to by the lack of funds on the part of the addicts to feed their habit. Our first responders will be overwhelmed. Our court system will be overwhelmed. Prisons will be full. And even prisons don't solve addiction. All they do is take addicts off the street. There's no curative power in prisons. Detox, rehab, recovery are our options. But I will put forth to you, until the supply is ended, until addicts are not receiving that daily dosage, they will continue to be addicts. If the lack of pills drove individuals to heroin, lack of heroin will have a beneficial impact as far as driving addicts to detox, rehab, and eventual recovery. The heroin epidemic, the opioid epidemic, is winnable, but it's a battle that has to be fought half a world away. End the source. End the Taliban, who is being financed in their terrorist efforts by that very heroin. End the Mexican drug cartels, who live luxurious lives on the profits of the heroin that they buy and import from Afghanistan. We can win this. This may have sounded to be a very pessimistic presentation. It is not. If anything, I'm a coach. I would equate this with a pregame speech. You know what your opponent is like. You know what their strengths are. You know what the cost of losing is. Why not win it? Why not do what is necessary? Will it at times be a bitter fight? Certainly will be. But it is far the better than the alternative of its continuation and its perpetuation and its increasing. Dr. Maletz, closing thoughts?
Absolutely. So again, we have been discussing at Mayor Passaro's task force. We would love for this movement to start here in New London County. The steps taken by the firefighters, dramatic in maybe even reaching a national level of awareness. But for the audience, the answer is the brain on the other side of the world is a remarkable miracle of healing. And again, the stigma of addiction needs to be eliminated from the conversation. The one word I like to apply to the addicted patients on the whole list we discussed is that they are patients. They're our brothers, our sisters, they're our mothers, our fathers. They are of all races, creeds, colors, and socioeconomics. This is in truth, this is an epidemic worldwide. And we need to stop it. We need to stop it at the source. We need to stop it at each of our brains. The medical community can do what it does best, which is treat patients. And we know how to do that. Our information is much more replete than it ever has been before. We need cooperation, and it's going to take community by community. It's going to take neighborhood by neighborhood to stop this. And it needs to stop now. It needs to stop forever. We don't need to be generationally subjecting future generations to this problem of a brain disease that is unnecessary and is costing all of us lots more than just money.
I'd like to thank everybody for watching this program tonight. And I'd just like to say, from somebody that has boots on the ground, we're out there every day, we're dealing with this on a regular basis. We need to win this fight. And if we have a hazardous material spill on the highway, we go to the source and we put a plug in the source and we eliminate the source. to make our community safe. We need to go to the source. We need to go to these poppy fields, and we need to stop that flow coming back into the United States. Thank you for watching this program. And last comments, I'll turn over.
On behalf of the doctor and the chief, myself, all who work under the SALOH umbrella, all who work against the opioid heroin epidemic, our heartfelt thanks for this opportunity to reach a greater audience. We offer presentations to any group that is willing to invite us. We do not charge anything. We cover all of our expenses. Please, if you have a group that you feel would benefit from an in-person presentation, we are available. Tom, you have done as much as anyone in Connecticut to combat the opioid heroin epidemic. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for coming on and presenting it on the show. Thank you all for coming here. SEC TV has presented this tonight and taken extra time, and they're also running the 8 sessions of heroin addiction randomly on Channel 12, and they believe in getting the information out to the public, and I'm hoping that you can celebrate with us that we are getting it out to the public. If you see anybody who needs help, call one of us, call me, I'll get in touch with somebody for you. It's important, and we got to get it done because we're losing our kids. Special thanks to the Frank and Frank at SEC TV for their putting this on and helping me with all of my shows. I just want to remind everybody that we're on YouTube now, and we're on SEC TV is on YouTube. So if you missed anything, take a look on it. You should be reading. Cold is coming. Winter is here, almost here. Cuddle up with a good book at night. I'll see you next week. Thank you, guys.